when this book is interested in the question of like, will we slash should we have people living on the moon? I think that's a question that's interesting for everyone, and it's really interesting for, let's say, a Native American Instagram influencer online activist.
I'm Michael Tamblyn. This is Kobo in Conversation. My guest is Eliana Ramage, author of To the Moon and Back. It's a novel about Steph, a young Cherokee woman who from the earliest age has her sights set on the stars, dreaming about one day becoming a NASA astronaut. Eliana Ramage, welcome to Kobo.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right off the bat, tell us about Steph, your main character.
She is exactly what you said. I think the most important thing to know about her is what we learn pretty much on like page 2 of the book. She wants to be an astronaut. I think she's someone who believes that maybe that's all there is, that that's the kind of big dream where it might crowd out other things you love in life. But of course, her life does come to include much more than that.
The book starts with a chapter where Steph is the narrator. She's imagining her mother fleeing a bad situation in Texas with Steph and her sister Kayla in tow on the way to Oklahoma. Why start the novel there?
I find it interesting. I don't know, I don't believe that Hannah, the mother, put this much thought into this, but for myself, it's immediately apparent that when everything is falling apart, when she's in real danger and crisis, she goes straight to this small Cherokee community. It's not her home. That part of the country, that community even has not been her home for I think 2 generations. And so this idea of reconnection or this idea of where do you go, who do you need to be with when you're in trouble is something that is a gift Hannah really wants to give her daughters. Her daughters are 2 different people, and so they both respond to that gift in, I think, 2 different ways.
We enter Steph's life as a teenager. She's at that place that I think a lot of us can identify with. She feels a lot. Things are either very good or very bad. She has goals and dreams that are just white hot, intense.
Mhm.
Other kids are intolerable. Parents are disappointing. Describe how Steph sees her trajectory and just the, kind of the part of the world that she's living in and what she's struggling against at that time.
Well, if we think about what her mother Hannah was trying to give as a gift, her mother was thinking, I've had these bad things happen in my life, in part due to a lack of security and grounding and having people who kind of support who I am. And so I'm going to give you the ultimate grounding. I'm going to send you to a school where there are Cherokee language lessons. I'm going to get this like beautiful community around to like help you kind of know who you are, know it's okay. This is a place you can be safe. Steph takes that to be jail. I think that she understands it as pretty far away from space. And the way she even thinks about space there, I think it changes across her life because sometimes it's a place to go to. It's opportunity, it's beauty, it's, where could we as humanity go next? It's all these wonderful things. Um, but sometimes I think she thinks of it as who do I need to be and what do I need to achieve in order to get there? And in her eyes, that does not mean, a small Native community. That means you have to get to prep school and then like the most famous college you can think of, and just like all of these steps that could get you farther and farther away from the people who love you.
And as you say, she is obsessed with space, not
Yes.
just as a subject, but as a career, as
Hmm.
a life path, being an astronaut and all of the steps that it takes to get there.
Yeah.
Like when we hear people say, going to the moon, we hear people say, like, being a rocket scientist, it's often a stand-in for the ultimate in, career or life unattainability.
Yes.
So what does space travel represent for you in this story here?
I think it changes in terms of like what it's like to be um, like careerist, but also like 15 years old. One of the things that really sticks out to me is this crazy fact I learned in the research, which is that it's more likely for a person to have triplets than to be an astronaut. So if that's kind of what you're up against and you really want it, then yeah, you're going to be pretty ruthless in how you treat your career. Um, but the bigger picture, those themes that are not just in Steph's brain, especially her, earlier in life brain. I think this book and all the people in it, they believe and they certainly want to believe that space is hope. It's belief in an optimistic future, and it's not about like one person going to space. It's about all of these different scientists, all of these different teachers, just the different roles we all take on in life and how we contribute to a hopefully better world, sort of one person at a time in their in their lane, what they can take responsibility for.
The the facts that you pull out about astronaut training, about all of the things that go into becoming and being an astronaut are salted through this book. And so I'm interested in whether you brought some of these into the writing process, or did you have to do the ultimate deep dive into
Mm.
learning about astronaut training and how to change bolts in space?
Yes, there's so much research. There was so much research, but I don't know what it would be like to write this kind of book with a shorter timeline than I did.
Mhm.
It ended up taking me about 12 years. And so that research kind of happened one step at a time. I would completely ignore the fact that I know that there's some, undersea stuff that can happen in astronaut training. So I wouldn't worry about that for like a few years, several years. And then once I get to the scene where, or near that scene where that was going to happen, then I would do a deep dive, ha ha ha. But like a deep dive into exactly that, what that would look like. And it really helps when you're writing about something that, of course, you think is cool because you'll see like the YouTube video that's a tour around the little undersea research station thing
Mhm.
and you'll love it.
And your dad helped you out on some of these details too, didn't he?
Ooh, okay. So it's actually not my dad. My UK editor is Bobby Mastanoan, and their dad in also the UK. So their dad is an astrophysicist and like an expert diver.
Okay.
And
Great resource.
yes, he just read the whole book and did inline comments about like that's not how this works, that's not how that works. And like he did all these equations that I barely understood, but I understood that I very much needed the help.
And I call it out because dads always like to hear that they've helped. So it's
But so many people helped.
and I want to talk about some of the people that sort of surround this book, but
Hmm.
but I don't want to leave Steph behind yet because
Okay,
uh,
okay.
Steph is kind of a jerk sometimes. Like,
Oh, absolutely.
and part of it comes from she has this laser focus, and anybody who drifts kind of out of her field of view kind of vanishes from her consciousness.
Hmm.
And even after finishing the book, she seems real, but also like a bit of an enigma, as some people
Hmm.
just are. And so, can
Yeah.
you talk a bit about rendering a character who's always a little bit unknowable, always a little bit difficult?
Yes, I found her really exciting to write, I think for that reason.
Hmm.
Um, Before writing this book, I wrote short stories in like high school and college. And I always had the main characters, and it was always in first person point of view, and those main characters would carry a lot of the values that I had. And so they could be in different situations, but they would often like respond to things in a similar way I would, or they would certainly like hold the same like deepest values that I did. Um, I found it really fun, really interesting, really complicated, really challenging to not do that with Steph. And I don't think I could, given how much she wants to go to space and how much I don't. How she thinks about the balance between your career and the people you love. Like there are just these huge differences that I was afraid to write a person who was that different from me when I was early in writing because I felt
Hmm.
like, the write what you know kind of thing. But I actually much prefer this now, and I think it's because there's just so much room to be curious and to like bump up against a character and see her really surprise you.
Hmm. And let's talk about some of those other characters. So we have Steph's sister, Kayla.
So Kayla is Steph's younger sister.
Hmm.
She has, I think, an opposite response to their childhood because, in part, like she's younger when they arrive in Oklahoma, and so she does not feel like we were these at-large citizens, these like Cherokees who don't live in Cherokee lands, and then like we suddenly were here. She feels like this is just who we are. This is my home. These are my people. Like in so much so that this like really defines who I am and what I care about. This is what I
Hmm.
stand for. So she grows up to become a Cherokee uh, artist and activist and social media influencer.
Hmm.
It just really funny to me, but also I was with her long enough that I eventually stopped like laughing at her and came to understand her. And sometimes I'll laugh with her now. Um,
And then we have the other young woman in the mix, Della.
okay, so Della is Steph's girlfriend. They meet in college, and Della brings this whole backstory. She had a contested adoption case when she was a baby. She was adopted by a white LDS, a Mormon couple that loved her very, very, very much. But they adopted her by sort of skirting around the Indian Child Welfare Act.
Mhm.
So that's a law in the US from the 1970s that was passed in response to this long and dark history of Native children being separated from their families. So, because of that, there's a case that keeps getting appealed. It makes its way up to the Supreme Court. She spends a few years living with her Cherokee biological father in Oklahoma. And in the end, she is taken away from him and goes back to live with the adoptive couple. A complicated background, but it's something that
Mhm.
really happens. And it means that when she shows up in college and she meets Steph and they're both living in the Native American student house, they're part of the Native student organization. Like that's kind of their lives and their community that they share. Everybody else in that student organization is coming from like, this has always been our story. We know who we are.
Mhm.
We've been around people who understand that about us. She is somebody who has been told almost all of her life that that's not who she is.
Mhm.
Um, and she's trying to sort of reconnect. She's trying to figure out what her story is and tell it, but within the tension of like, because of the Supreme Court case, I'm actually a little bit famous. And so everybody thinks that they already know who I am, who I should be, what's kind of permissible for these three different parents who love her.
And a poster child for an issue
Yeah,
and kind of defined externally rather, in addition to whatever she's trying to define for herself.
absolutely.
And in the creation of this book, um, Della was originally at the center of a very different story that you were telling. And
Yeah.
so tell me about how these three characters kind of reconfigured themselves over time, as you say, this like 12-year span where you were figuring out how to put this book together.
Oh my gosh. I have a chart that I wrote out of this at one point because I was confusing even myself. Because there were so
Excellent.
many different there were so many different versions. And since I started when I was like the first moment was when I was about 18, and now I'm about to turn 35. So um it was not like figure out the idea and write it straight through
Mhm.
process. There was a version of this book that was only about Della, and we followed her, I believe, all the way into like her 50s, with no Steph. And there was a version where we had a book about only Steph, and she didn't want to be an astronaut. Like there was very little to that version. Um, there was a version where Steph and Della were okay. They were both. Steph did want to be an astronaut. They both were together. Um, it like was pretty close, except for it was set 200 years in the future in this like sovereign Cherokee Nation state. There was like a civil war going on outside. Um, yeah, that was the least successful one.
Which
But
is
I
why
was
I should
used
never
to.
be an editor. Like just to be clear. Like,
But it's just like there were so many different versions, and throughout all of those different versions, like I did often keep trying to come back to this one. The problem is that I always thought of this one in my head as kind of like when I was being nice to myself, I'd call it the ambitious one. When I was being mean to myself, I'd call it the messy one. And so it wasn't really until 2020 that pandemic time, I was able to tell myself like this has been the one you have always wanted to do, even if it's got like a lot of characters doing a lot of different things in it. Now you just gotta finish a version that you would be proud of the novel that you would be proud of, and then just call it a day. Just like be proud that you did it.
um, in the background of this book, you know, which is about a Cherokee family, is the Trail of Tears, which
Yes.
sits at the heart of uh, the indigenous experience for many in the U.S., but it may not be as familiar for people outside it.
Mm.
Can you explain for listeners who may have heard the phrase what the Trail of Tears was, how it fits into this book?
It's a really good question to get because like a few days ago there was a podcast that was asking me like, what's something um that you are really want to know more about that you're really interested now that you weren't before. And I was like, I need to know more about the history of First Nations people in Canada. Like I haven't gotten to spend time in Canada until this
Oh,
book.
do we have authors for you? Just,
Okay, but that's what I learned in Canada. I went into these bookstores and there were all these authors and all these books. And it was so clear from like the first conversation I had at a couple of festivals in Canada that there's a lot that that I don't know that I've been really interested in since coming back. So the Trail of Tears is a story that it's something that happened to Cherokee people and to several other tribal nations that were in the southeast of the U.S. So what was known as Cherokee Nation included like Tennessee, Georgia, North Carolina, all these places, and it ended up being a forced march, like a death march,
Mhm.
from there by the U.S. government. So from there, those homelands to what would be known as Indian Territory. For Cherokee people, I know that it's estimated that 1/4 of the tribe died on that walk. And I also know that we don't call that Indian Territory today because what was promised at the end. I mean, I know it was forced, but what was promised at the end of that walk was like, okay, you've been relocated from your homelands to Indian Territory, but like, don't worry, Indian Territory is going to be your place now.
It's going to be great. Yeah.
It's gonna be great.
Yeah.
um, and I believe it's 1907, Oklahoma statehood. And that part of the story, what happened between the Trail of Tears and termination, that's something that I didn't know anything about until I started writing this novel because the Trail of Tears is such rightly so, it's such a big story. Like, who are we on different land? That and I think some other Cherokee people sometimes have the tendency to be like, this is sometimes like our defining historical moment. It's certainly like the only moment that I think American kids are taught in school.
Mhm.
So having a brother who grew up to be a Cherokee historian and who was studying that period from the end of the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma statehood, he all of a sudden was able to bring this context into this novel, into this family that helped me understand that like that story, of course, continued, and that the story for these characters from about the present day moving forward, of course, that's going to continue as well in surprising ways.
And your brother was looking at this from a more academic angle, from
Yes.
the angle of a historian. You are incorporating it into a story as a novelist. How how did the two of you connect on that? Like, are you just, you know, trading pieces of history back and forth? Are you coming to him and going, so post Trail of Tears, let's break it
Yeah.
down for me. What does that exchange look like?
I think I first got interested when I read an excerpt from his dissertation.
Okay, that's a good sister right there. Lot of sisters would not do that.
Well, he's a very good writer. And one of the things I liked about his dissertation is that he used he's a good storyteller. So he would use examples of real people and what their lives were like, what they were thinking about. In pretty detailed ways that felt like real and interesting to me, even though it's within this context of like the political and economic history of the nation that just flew over my head. So I don't think I would have connected to the topic if I didn't have someone in the family
Hmm.
who could talk to me about it in this way that makes sense to me, like story wise, or meaning wise. Like, why do I care about this? What are the pieces of the history that I'm missing, and what's the struggle with me missing them? So,
Hmm.
for example, like if a lot of the general narrative out there is that Trail of Tears, and then everything historically is kind of like downhill from then. Everything has been terrible. Then it kind of lends a belief that the characters that I care so much about are they're less authentic. They're losing their
Hmm.
Cherokee-ness. Like what are we going towards? And having a better understanding of what was going on in the past, I think gave me more optimism for the future, even when the things I was learning about in the past were like not happy, not easy.
Hmm. What what's interesting about that is the book gives the reader a window into families and communities in the contemporary Cherokee Nation. And every author, I think, faces this challenge when writing about a community, especially writing about their own community. How much time do I take to ground readers in this place, in these
Hmm.
people? How much history and how much context do I
Yeah.
provide? What did you want to make sure that every reader came away with about the
Mm.
Cherokee Nation when they finally sat down, when they finally set the book down?
Oh, wow. It's been so long since I was needing to make those decisions. And I think so much of it was feeling things out.
Hmm.
I think just the first example that's coming to mind is what you were asking earlier of why does it start in the car going to Oklahoma? Um, I did want. this family, even though they would grow up in a Cherokee community, I did want them to be what we call at-large Cherokee citizens. My family is all at-large Cherokee citizens, so I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and Oklahoma is not home for me.
Mm.
My grandfather was the last person to live there before leaving for work, and it's an it, it's something that I care about, not because I want like these characters to like reflect my exact experience. We have characters who do grow up in Oklahoma, but it's because I think that having a novel that's about Cherokee people who are from all over the place, that reflects this like interesting question, this place that we are in today as Cherokee people. We're the majority of Cherokee people today. First off, huge tribe. I think it's 400,000 people right now. So if the majority of Cherokee people like live outside of Cherokee Nation, then it lends the question of like, what is it again? Like, what does it mean to be Cherokee? And if someone who, let's say, someone were like six generations outside of living in a community like near other Cherokee people, I don't know what that would look like, but I'm very interested in what that would look like. And so I wanted readers to experience these several different Cherokee people who are from different families and different backgrounds, different experiences, to all be kind of approaching that question of like, what does it mean from different directions in a way that would echo into those questions that were asked in the past and that we would have some curiosity about and optimism towards for the future.
Your book is filled with journeys, forced journeys like the family's move from Texas to Oklahoma, or like the Trail of Tears. You have the journeys of choice, like Steph's just burning desire to embark on, moving away from home, somewhere uncharted, to school, to space. So can you talk a bit about, the journeys that we're reading about in this book and whether they connect at all, or what significance that idea of moving from place to place has?
Hmm. Journeys are, I think, so much a part of life in general, but also life when you go for these certain careers. I think like last week I was listening to the Ezra Klein podcast, and he was talking to a researcher about how I'm going to get this wrong, but it's like a very large percentage of Americans actually do live within, I think, 20 miles of their mothers. But I wouldn't have guessed that because I
Hmm.
happen to be in this bubble of like people who did a bunch of higher education, and you like go and you do those schools and or like set off on those careers, and you're like, well, now the only professorship is if I move to this place where I don't know anyone. So part of it is practical, in terms of like someone like Steph would be sent all over the country and all over the world, in pursuit of that kind of career that doesn't
Hmm.
really care if you live near your mother. They're like, you can
Yep.
figure that out yourself. Um,
And one that has such a high bar to entry that you would do
yes,
literally anything to achieve it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it does not have to be as extreme as being an astronaut. Like it, when we want certain careers, then they ask that kind of thing of us. But of course, it's never practical when we're asking ourselves about like what we're willing to give up. So when I think about her journey that she makes for her career, I also think about her sister marrying a Native Hawaiian man and having a kid who grows up, first in Boston and then in Hawaii as someone who's Cherokee and Native Hawaiian. Like these journeys are part of what it is for a lot of Native people today.
Mhm.
And when this book is interested in the question of like, will we slash should we have people living on the moon? I think that's a question that's interesting for everyone. And it's really interesting for, let's say, a Native American Instagram influencer online activist.
Steph says early in the book, quote, if I could figure out the money and the applications and the getting myself to college, I decided I would be gay. Or bi, maybe. At schools like Harvard, they let you figure that out. I, Tell me about this very pragmatic framework for coming out.
Oh my gosh, everything about her is so pragmatic.
It's like, I've got a plan.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
some people are the opposite. Some people in those teen years are like all emotion, and then like, you kind of watch them like cross off some dreams and
yeah.
become more practical as they age. I think her arc is in some ways kind of the opposite. She does, I think, know who she is emotionally, but I also think that she's vulnerable in a way she doesn't want to think about, doesn't want to talk about. Um, and she relating to that first scene where, something bad happened. And I think that she's someone who has is holding on to her ambition. It's
Mhm.
as kind of like it's crazy to say because it's being an astronaut is not really something you can control and it's probably not going to happen. But in her in her eyes, it a little bit is something she can control. She can
Mhm.
build a life where you don't just tell everyone you're gay. You wait until you've arrived at hopefully Harvard.
Uh, a lot of parents picking up this book will be caught by the title To the Moon and Back, which, to me evokes a children's book. Guess How Much I Love You, which
Yeah.
I read 87,000 times. Um, but when that phrase appears in your book, it's a scary scene,
Mm,
where Steph's dad, who they fled from in
hmm.
Texas, is raving about the different ways that the world could end and how running to the moon and back reflects the effort that will be required to survive.
Yes.
Tell me about the title and what you were trying to evoke there, because those are two very different kind of feelings that sit in those words.
Yes. So this was actually the second title. Um, and the first title that it was for many, many years until like I think 2 years ago was Here Men from the Planet Earth. And every time I said that title, then I would say three things. Number one, it's HERE, here. And number two, it's from a plaque that's on the moon, and it says, "Here, men from the planet Earth traveled across the stars. We come in peace." Blah blah blah. And then the third thing I would say is like it has the word "men" in it, but it's not about men; it's about women. So
And did you decide that you needed an alternate version, or did somebody come along and go, there's a lot happening here.
so the editors felt like, no, thank you.
They're good for that sometimes.
They're so good for that because I felt like, oh, but it's beautiful. And not only did they find something that's much more practical, but in terms of what this, real current title does for the book, I had never thought of a title as doing anything for
Mm.
the
Mhm.
writing because I just hadn't been in that position before. But there was a whole year of edits that I was doing, the very last round of edits with the editors, where I knew that that was the new title, To the Moon and Back. My agent, Meredith Caffel Simonoff, thought of the title and she was like, if you want it, here you go. So it means that in those edits, I felt myself, first off, like paying more attention to the mother, feeling like, I really need to do right by this woman who I didn't pay as much attention to when I was like in my early 20s writing these scenes. And then the second thing is that the title has "and back" in it,
Mhm.
and that's where we land the title. It's where we land the book, and it affected the way I was making decisions in the final year of revisions. I think that having that as kind of like this North Star of like, this is what this book is called, that gave me some direction in terms of like the heart of this story.
You lived with this book a long time.
Yes.
And it's had many iterations, it's had many different versions. Does it feel to you like just this series of layers sitting on top of each other, and this just happens to be the one that got like pulled out and put onto paper? Because they're like
Hmm.
This just feels like there are branches and branches and branches that could have been followed in the creation of this book.
That's such a funny way to think of it because I think of it as it was in a way like spiritually it was it was always this and
Okay.
I like tried 1,000 branches and they all didn't work and I but I think I feel that way because I would approach those branches as like I want to be doing A and A is hard or A is like too much to ask of readers, therefore let's make it more of a murder mystery. And
Mhm.
so I think it really, the way you think about those other options, those other possibilities, maybe has to do with like your confidence, where you are as a writer in your life, and how much you believe in the story. Because right now, when I'm 5 seconds into book two, it's nothing but branches. There's not
Mhm.
even a core. It's just throwing branches around. And so because I don't have a strong feeling of what I want it to be, all of those branches do feel like what you're saying. They do feel like there's possibility there instead of just like running away from what you'd
Right.
really like to work.
So it was like boiling down to an
Hmm.
essence.
That's a great metaphor. Yes.
So okay, so we're not going to get the choose your own adventure version where you get to choose like the title and you get to, you should choose whether it starts with Della or does it start with Steph
I
or
could just like rewrite this book
it
over and
just
over
like
again for the
yeah,
rest of
we
my
could,
career.
it just keeps unfolding over time. Um, this this is a coming of age book. In some ways, I do I understand correctly that you have been a high school teacher?
Yes.
So your depiction of the sheer agony of being a teenager comes through so clearly. And so I was wondering in that how much of that is from your own teenage life and how much of it comes
Mm.
from observing teenagers in the wild.
Oh my gosh, I have not been asked this before. I think that as a writer, I've always been I for many years was most interested in that age.
Mhm.
Before I was even a teacher, I think like when I was in college, I thought it was really interesting to remember what it was like to be in high school. There's so many questions at that time. What changed is I used to tell myself, you can only write characters who are like as old as like 19 because that's how old you are, and you can
Mhm.
only write characters that are as old as like 24. I had this idea that that those are the years that are interesting because you're still changing and learning yourself. And like once you hit 26, you're going to be fully formed and there's not going to be any interesting literature there.
26, well acknowledged as the end of life. Yes.
That's when like you are fully confident. You know
Yep. It's
exactly
all
what you're
done.
doing.
Yep.
So, so this is so much a coming of age novel because I just kept aging up these characters and I kept aging up myself. By the time we got to 2020, I was almost 30. I'd been divorced, I'd moved, I'd changed careers. Like so many things had been different, like in a good way or different, like heartbreaking. Um, and I had thought that I would like finish a book at 20. That didn't happen. So I was in this moment, moved back in with my parents who were in their 70s during the pandemic, and I came back to this book after not having written for 2 years. But I came back to this book and I felt like, okay, if you are still getting to know yourself, I'd come out a few years beforehand. If you're still changing, and your parents are still changing in their 70s, like this must be what it is to be alive. Um, and so you're like, it turns out that there is no limit on how old these characters can get because I need that arc of change to still be allowed for like even the mom character.
Mhm.
Um, this is something that I know is obvious, but I felt so sure of where I was going at like 21 that I had no idea.
As you should at 21. And, and this is, you know, this is in some ways a coming of age book, and it
Definitely. Hmm.
leaps to different stages in Steph's life, and you also use that to create a unique structure in the
Hmm.
storytelling itself. This is not like a single sort of line linear narrative. Did did that get created as you were putting all of these different threads and kind of views on the lives of these characters together, or was that always a part of the structure that you were imagining for the book?
Hmm. It was not always part of the structure. I think that I thought it might be, more straight through.
Mhm.
And as I was writing, I came to realize, like, oh, you just spent a long time in the college section, and the college section should be its own section because that has the feel and the meaning and the significance, like the tone, everything is different from when someone is on like their third like fellowship and PhD world. So understanding that like life has these eras that feel very specific or set aside in a way helped me with the writing to separate them out of it.
And just to be clear, I'm focusing a bit on the first part of Steph's life because I can talk about that without spoiling all the rest of the book.
Oh yeah,
But we
sorry.
do, we do see this whole arc of Steph's life and her career and the different things that happen to her that
Hmm.
I'm not going to talk about.
Okay.
You've said this is like this book kind of crystallized for you during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated right now because we're kind of going through the time of pandemic novels, like all of these books that
Hmm.
either gestated in 2020 and 2021 or got pulled out of a drawer and like rewritten and redone. Like
Yes.
there's this very interesting time of 2 years when a lot of authors got down to business.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it's worth asking, was there was there a bit of a like a pressure cooker environment for you of just having this time out of time to
Mhm.
dig into this book that, as you say, had been like in kind of in development for years?
It's so funny to think about how many books have that story now because it just
Yeah.
like reiterates for the people who aren't as close to publishing world. If like everybody was writing in 2020 and here we are 6 years later.
Now we're talking we're talking about it.
I actually felt the opposite of pressure, because the life I had before the pandemic, was really, really high pressure. So it was emotionally really difficult, but also the nature of the teaching job I had was like wake up at 5 a.m., get on a bus,
Mhm.
teach, and then like do tutoring till like 8 p.m. And so I could have,
And
yeah.
and maybe pressure's the wrong
Okay.
word. It's kind of like, was that a good focusing time? Was that like a time
Mm,
that you could really settle into the work, the character, the structures to pull
yeah.
this thing together?
I think it was a mix of two things. I think part of it was that I had a different job. So I had
Mhm.
a college mentor position with a nonprofit that started on Zoom at 9 a.m. One of my friends from MFA school said, "Do you want to join 4 a.m. club?" And like, it'll be four of us friends and we'll text each other at 4 a.m. being like, we're writing before the Zoom jobs start. So being able to like
Mhm.
write in your pajamas, that was just time that I hadn't had since grad school.
Mhm.
And so that was like the most real answer because you can want so many things and still like struggle with your time. It would have been very different if I had had my baby now that I have now, like if I had had that baby then. Um, but it was also, I think maybe even bigger than that, just like emotionally, the pandemic felt like, yeah, like you were saying, time has stopped. Everything is different. We don't know what comes next. If your life continues as is, then you could have like, you could live maybe somewhere you don't want to live, or like have a job that is working in these ways, not working in those ways. Once you find yourself like in your childhood bedroom and like things are scary, it felt like, you know, after this time in a year or two, like I'll be able to figure out what's the next step in terms of career. Do I need to get a different teaching
Mhm.
certification? Whatever those details of life are. Um, but emotionally, like I need to just prove to myself that I can close this chapter that has felt
Right.
so impossible.
You are an alumni of the Iowa Writers Workshop, which is
Yes.
one of the most prestigious of the U.S. creative writing programs and an incubator for so many authors who are forming kind of the foundations of like 21st century American fiction. Was, stay with me here,
Okay.
was Iowa your version of Space Camp? Like, was it like a dream, but one that you were
Oh
able
my
to
God.
attain?
Absolutely. That's so funny. Wow.
As you know, as somebody who's never been to the Iowa Writers Workshop, like, tell me about what makes that like Space Camp for somebody who's has
Mhm.
done a deep dive into creative writing.
So I've watched a bunch of videos online of like, what do you actually do at space camp? And I just keep remembering seeing clips of like kids doing that experiment where you like take an egg and then you have to build some kind of like special keep it safe structure and then you have to like throw it off it.
Hmm.
Okay, so I don't think that like doing that egg experiment, no offense to space camp, is is like something that you have to do in order to be an astronaut.
In space,
Yes, or in
right?
space. In space, it wouldn't even fall. Um, and so this is all coming together in my head right now. But of course, like going to creative writing grad school is not something that you have to do to be a writer. But what I'm realizing those two things may have in common is that like you have to travel to Huntsville, Alabama, in order to go to space camp. And so you probably have kids who are like real big space nerds. And then they go there and they meet each other and they can talk about space.
You found your people.
And yes, you find your people. The best part of writing is literary community. And that doesn't just mean like other writers, it means getting to like to know the editors, like these conversations that happen like with you, just all of these, the way writing goes from being such a solitary, should I be spending my time doing this thing for years and years? And then you go and you find out that there are other people who love it like just as much as throwing eggs off roofs.
Mhm.
That was huge for me to understand that this is a good group of people.
I love a complicated writing system, and I understand that you had a really good one. That there were colors and cue cards and like,
Yeah.
tell me about the system.
Okay. So there were a lot of dates and point of view character. There were just things to keep track of.
Hmm.
And so part of the system was, finish a draft. Um, and before there was an agent or an editor, I would have to like read it myself and figure out what was wrong with it. So journaling, just like writing out like to myself, I think what's going wrong here is blah, blah, blah. And like next time, blah, blah, blah. So just like talking myself through it because you can't always, have a workshop available. And even in workshop world,
Hmm.
it's typically not for a whole novel. Um, so there was that, but then the next step, I would make these to-do lists of what needs to happen in terms of organizing before starting that next draft. And a huge part of that, I think the biggest part of my organizing all of this was through storyboards. Um, Storyboarding means that I was looking at them, I would get out all these index cards
Are they
and
still on the wall?
they're not on the wall, but they're just like
Oh, okay.
stacked on top of each other.
Got it.
Um,
Okay.
so I would get all of these index cards out. And for example, with this book that has a lot of different themes, I would say like green is science, orange is Cherokee stuff, pink is like romantic love stuff. So all of these different things that need to be a consistent part of Steph's life and need to be a consistent part of the novel throughout the whole thing. And when you're reading through, you can kind of do a reverse outline and figure out, hey, if like green scene, green scene, green scene, like times nine, and then you get a like an orange scene, then that would be a signal to the writer of, oh, somewhere along the way, this has become a book about someone who's interested in sciencey stuff and like never thinks even once about being Cherokee. Or this is somebody who is really, really into her new girlfriend and doesn't care about space anymore. You're trying for a balance.
And so were you able to kind of pull back and look at the color coding and go, oh, I need like there needs to be some romance in here to break up the
Exactly.
science, or there.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
And then that's kind of like the outer layer of like the biggest thing that this scene is accomplishing
Mhm.
is science-y. So it's green, but then you can put stickers on those cards to be like, okay, like this is green, but no scene is ever just gonna be science. We need to like every once in a while remember that Steph had a biological father. So like put like an orange sticker on on that just to make sure that like there in real life too, we have all of these details that make up a whole person, and we don't want to just like forget about them.
And so with this book out and being reviewed well and being received well, is the writing system now being spun up to focus on something new?
Definitely not the storyboarding. Um,
Okay.
I I I am interested in, I'm not at this stage yet. I'm still in the brainstorming stage for a second
Mhm.
novel. But right now it's like trying out scenes, it's journaling, it's making lists of like what are the books that I loved last year, the year before? What did I love about them? Like what do I wish my first book had like more of because it was really exciting to work on, and like can I try that out in this scene or that scene with these characters that I'm getting to know? Um, After that, I definitely still value an organizational system, so I would like to work towards an outline, but I don't want to think about storyboarding until after that first draft because I think for me, I see it as like more corrective.
Eliana, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. This is a delight.
I've been speaking with Eliana Ramage, author of To the Moon and Back. Find it at kobo.com/conversation. Check the show notes for a link. Follow us in the podcast player of your choice to catch every episode. And if you enjoyed this one, tell somebody who makes you starry-eyed. Kobo in Conversation is produced by Nathan Maharaj and hosted by me, Michael Tamblyn. Thank you for listening. And we're done.
Amazing. That was really fun.
Iowa Writers Workshop at Space Camp.
I can't believe that nobody thought of that until you.
It crystallizes what that looks like for me now, having
Hmm.
having never seen it. But
Someone asked if like creative writing school was like Hogwarts, but those kids like seem to have worked so hard. They were like always doing homework,
yeah,
which you don't have to do.
that's right. So you're a grown-up MFA person. You can work as much or as little as you want.
Exactly.
Yeah.